had to learn to kill my children. I think climate change is a real issue, a real existential threat. I wanted to tell the story where AI is used in a positive, in a good way. Superstition had no place in making decisions for a better life. My day job is to run one of the largest classical music sites on the internet.
Hello, Mr. Pierre. Welcome to Online Book Club.
Hello, Jane Rose. My pleasure.
Please tell us about the origin of your story. How did you come about AWE, Artificial Wisdom Engine?
The original idea basically came in a previous administration, rather terrible response to climate change. I think climate change is a real issue, a real existential threat, even to our civilization. And the skeptics, pose a real problem. That married with the amount of disinformation or misinformation that is being sent out there creates a very toxic brew, which I think is awfully dangerous. So the idea of writing a book that dealt with climate change came fairly early, probably around 2019, something like this, 2018, 2019. And then I wanted to, what are the main elements that one needs in order to tackle that problem? The main reason why I selected to work towards artificial intelligence was that I felt that not only do we have to respect the findings of science, but we also have to be able to fight disinformation in a way that is much more effective than what has been done heretofore. And that's when I came up with the idea of, well, what comes after AI? And I imagined a super AI engine that would be built to offer wisdom. It's a complicated term, but most people understand that wisdom basically is what we need to be successful as a civilization.
Yeah.
I happen to also be a long-time director of the SETI Institute, and you may have heard of the Drake equation, which determines a probability of how many civilizations out there in the galaxy we could, from whom we could receive signals. And the last term of that equation is L, and L is the length of time a civilization sticks around sending signals that could be detected. And I'm afraid that if we do not here in our civilization tackle climate change, L is going to be pretty damn short. So the combination of being aware of this L factor in the Drake equation, plus the lack of response or the insufficient response to the pandemic from the previous administration, and the possibility of developing an engine that would offer wisdom beyond artificial intelligence was basically what came together to give me the idea, the basic idea for the book, or AWE, which stands for Artificial Wisdom Engine.
That is brilliant. While I was reading your book, it occurred to me that I've never read a fictional novel with climate change as its major theme, or one of its major themes. And that surprised me, because climate change is such an important issue. How do you manage to balance the storytelling with the science, the facts, and the seriousness of the situation?
So the first thing I should say is that the idea of building something that would be beyond the current state of AI was actually developed. I thought of awe before GPT was actually a thing. So back in 2018, 19, we did not have ChatGPT. I had some inkling of what artificial intelligence could do. Of course, we already knew back then. And I went to listen to some experts at Stanford, which is about 2 miles away from here, uh, to understand what they were doing with AI in many different disciplines. But the basic reason why I wanted to write a novel as opposed to a nonfiction book, which I've done before, I wrote 3 nonfiction books back in the 70s, so that makes me older than Methuselah, is the fact that in order to communicate something, storytelling is the absolute best. It's the actually only way that you can penetrate other people's consciousness. Yeah. And as climate change is very important, and as there are some quarters who believe that AI could actually be a threat, I wanted to tell the story where AI is used in a positive, in a good way, while explaining that we have to be very careful with that. Content generation is not used for nefarious purposes. So the idea that I had to stick science to science in a clear and accurate way, that comes from my entire way of looking at things. I've been fascinated by physics since my early teens, physics, astronomy, cosmology. I've always thought that in order to solve problem, one had to use data and logic, and superstition had no place in making decisions for a better life or a safer life. So I read Nature and Science magazine every week, fairly religiously. Even though I don't have a PhD in anything, I am a computer scientist, basically self-taught. I don't have any degrees, but I did teach computer science at NYU and FIT New York for about half a dozen years before I moved to Hong Kong, where I developed a technology that became part of a national standard in the US. So I lived in Europe first, then the US, then in Asia, in Hong Kong for 11 years, and then came back to the US. Always trying to reach out to scientists to understand what they do, how they do it, and basically because I'm fascinated by the way these people think. And my hobby is actually to go and visit the scientists in their labs or their observatories, which brought me to the deepest minds looking for neutrinos or dark matter, or the highest observatories at the highest mountains or the highest desert in the Atacama in Chile. I spent almost 2 weeks at the South Pole itself, and getting close to all these scientists allowed me to reflect. Besides the fact that we call that a computer scientist, is allowed me to transfer and put to paper inside the story how one approaches science in a constructive manner.
From what you just said, it's clear you did a lot of research before writing this book. So what I want to know is any of the science in your book fictional? Because it's really impressive technology, yeah? So I just assumed that some of it was fictional. But hearing your answer to my last question has given me some doubt. So yeah, is any of it fictional, or did all existing technology?
Yeah, no, everything in the book is actually either exists or is possible. I only took one tiny little liberty, um, and that is the description of the exoskin when Pic de Lucrète goes into a simulation for the space elevator to go to the space station. He wears an exoskin in the simulation so that it can give him a sense of nanogravity. And there are exo uh, gloves that exist. There are exo patches so that you can feel, some impulses on your nerves. But a complete exoskin, to my knowledge, hasn't been done. But I think it's just an extension of what already exists. Otherwise, absolutely everything I describe in the book is actually either possible or already exists.
I don't really keep up with things happening in the science space, but I'm really impressed by how far we have come. This is so cool.
It is as long as it is used wisely, and that is the actual that is the key.
Very important. You know, when I was growing up, one of my favorite animations was The Lost City, Atlantis, The Lost City, yeah? So when I saw it mentioned in your book, I was so excited. So, how did this legend find its way to your story?
So the idea of inserting the story of Atlantis or as a motivation to do a search for it in the book came actually fairly late in the writing process. And the reason for that was that I wanted to establish very early on in the book, which I hadn't done at that point, that science had to be respected and that wishful thinking has no place in solving very big issues. So I decided to use Atlantis as a parable, if you will. For the search of Atlantis is one thing, but the method for searching Atlantis was something that actually made no scientific sense. And that is basically there's this, I imagine this very rich foundation, Greek foundation, had found a manuscript, a papyrus that was tightly rolled, and in which apparently Plato had written, or somebody had written that Plato said that Atlantis actually had been real, and they were determined to go and find it. I now also used SLAC, the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center, where they, a few years ago, were able to decode Archimedes' palimpsest, which was an actually incredible engineering feat, where they were able to use their linear accelerator to probe every molecule, every atom of this very mangled manuscript and detect the tiny, minute changes in the composition of these molecules to indicate that there was ink there. And from that, they were able to reconstruct the text. So I used the same idea where this manuscript was decoded and in which apparently Atlantis was determined could possibly be real. So that's fine. But the president of that foundation was also an astrology believer, and that is something that creates problems because astrology actually makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. I fairly recently read, actually only a week ago, Will Durant and his wife wrote a book on the story of a civilization that it took them about 40 years to write. An absolutely extraordinary book, which I highly recommend, even though it's going to take you 3 or 4 months to read the whole thing, in which they relate the story that Cicero, about one in the 1st century BC had said that believing in astrology actually makes absolutely no sense. And he gives the example of all the soldiers who had died in one battle could not possibly have been all born under the same star, the same astrological sign. So even then, back then, he dismissed astrology as being superstition and absolute nonsense. So when Pic de Lucrèce, the hero of the story, who is asked to evaluate this request to go and find Atlantis with a UAV, with an underwater automated vehicle, when he hears that there is a wishful thinking behind this search for Atlantis, he decides to drop the project. And that is an example of a scientist who has to make a decision that will cost them a lot of money, because that foundation had promised them to fund a lot of research at Paris if they take on that Atlantis search. But because the science was not correct, the foundational thinking behind this whole thing was very dubious, they dropped it. And that was an early example. I wanted to place a marker in the book to say, if you're going to solve problems, you have to respect the science.
Okay, let's talk about the music. At the start of each chapter, you put a music recommendation, and each recommendation goes so well with the chapter. So I want to know, how did you select the music for each chapter? How did you do that?
Well, first I have to explain that my day job is to run one of the largest classical music sites on the internet. It's called Classical Archives. I started that as a complete hobby when I was living in Hong Kong in 1990. I started the Classical Archives in 1994. And at that time, I only offered MIDI files, classical music MIDI files. I basically opened a small page on the internet, which was 1 or 2 years old back then. I mean, the World Wide Web. And I offered about 40 files, MIDI files that I had sequenced myself of classical music. And at the bottom of the page, I put a couple of lines that said, if you, the visitor, have other MIDI files that you think would interest other lovers of classical music, send them to me and I will put them up on that page, with the only promise that I will categorize everything correctly. Within 6 months, I had the largest classical music site in the world, because so many people really like the idea, not only to share their MIDI files, but also that it would be categorized properly. So the curation was the key. And to make a very long story short, in 2001, a partner came in and we decided to augment Classical Archives to offer live recordings, real recordings from the big labels. And that's what we did. So now we have, millions of tracks, and people go to Classical Archives all the time. We have a following of millions. We have a mailing list with over 250,000 people, which is very nice. So every 2 Sundays we send a newsletter giving some details about a composer. But the promise has stayed, is that when you go to Classical Archives, what you will find will be curated properly. So you can find a composer, you can find his music, you can find the artist, you can find the genre, you can find the period. All this is linked and cross-linked, so you can navigate from one to the other very, very easily. And that makes it very, very, very nice. So when I wrote the book, I thought, wouldn't it be nice to have some kind of music that would reflect the atmosphere or the storytelling in that particular chapter? Now, I have to go back to when I was 14. I was raised in Geneva, Switzerland. And when I was about 14, I was reading a novel about a hero that was walking into a large cavern next to a lake. It was very dark, and he was searching for a friend that had been wounded. And as usual, when I was reading back then, I was playing music, always classical, on my gramophone. And the music, was very, very quiet, tranquil, reflecting just like the lake in that gigantic cavern. And suddenly, there's a dinosaur that erupts from the from the lake with a terrifying roar. And at exactly the same minute, the same second, the music changed from one movement to the other. As it happened, it was a change from the second movement of Tchaikovsky Piano Concerto No. 1 to the third movement. And you can hear, at least it was from the first to the second to the third, I don't remember. But there is this suddenly eruption of music exactly at the time that dinosaur erupted. And that experience stayed with me ever since. So when I wrote the book, I thought, wouldn't it be nice to also have a background in music that would reflect what I'm reading? The trick, of course, is to make sure that you don't select something that will last 20 minutes when the chapter is read in 3 minutes. So as I happen to run Classical Archives, I asked my chief technology officer to create a new filter, a new search filter, which everybody can use now in Classical Archives, and say, I want to look for a piece, let's say piano, romantic, that lasts between 3 minutes and 5 seconds and 3 minutes and 15 seconds. And now anybody can do that kind of search on Classical Archives. It's very, very useful. And to calculate the length of time, I just divided the total number of words that you can find very easily on Word, Microsoft Word, by the average number of words that I read per minute. And that gave me the length of time that I had to select. But I knew what type of music I wanted to have. And that selection was done. And I asked one of my ex-wives, I'm very friendly with all my ex-wives. And that ex-wife happens to be an extraordinary opera singer. And so she knows a lot of the repertoire as well of classical music. And the two of us worked for about a month, I think, to select the proper music for every one of these chapters. And that's how it came to be.
It was an experience. You did a great job with that. It all would make a really good movie. That is a statement. Now the question is, do you ever plan on making it into one?
So many people told me that the book should be made into a movie or TV series. And I'd be very happy to see that. The problem is that I don't have any experience in writing scripts. Writing a novel after having written several nonfiction books was a big jump, but writing a script is an entirely different venture. So, this is up to whoever watches this on YouTube, I guess, should pick up the idea that there is indeed many people who think that this story should be made into a movie. I agree. I'm waiting for somebody to contact me. You can contact me through my website. It's on at the back of the back cover. You can see that my website is www.prs.com. My initials, Peter Rogers Schwob, Robert Schwob. Anyway, so yeah, I think it would be a great idea to see this into a movie. I have a couple of friends who sent it to actors they know. I won't mention them because there's no reason to do that yet. But I haven't heard anything, so it's still very early days. The book just recently came out. It became an Amazon bestseller about a month ago. We received fantastic reviews. So yes, I hope this will happen, and maybe you can help making it happen. Thank you.
Well, it does have great potential. I do hope it becomes a movie someday. You just mentioned that writing this book was a bit difficult for you because you are more used to writing non-fiction, yeah? Okay, so what was the writing process really like for you?
Okay, that's actually a very good question. And, I just had to learn like other fiction writers have to learn. There are a couple of very, very important things you have to do when you write a novel, possibly any book as well. But particularly for a novel, there are a couple of rules that I actually didn't know at all. One of them is to stay in the story, because when you are writing, especially a story in which I personally feel very invested, like solving climate change is something that all of us should be very invested in. So, when you get passionate, you start to write things that diverge a little bit from the storyline, and that you can't do. You have to always stay within the story. The other thing that I had to learn early on, and thankfully, a good friend of mine who is an editor taught me that lesson very early, that I had to learn to kill my children. It's a horrible, horrible phrase, but it's very adequate because I had to learn to kill characters, remove entire characters, entire chapters, entire passages, so that I could focus on the story. And the other, perhaps less important advice was that you end every chapter with a hook, so that the reader wants to continue reading. These are little tricks, but the killing the children was a painful lesson for me, because I really had to get rid of many characters that I had developed and that I loved and had nothing to do with the story, so they're gone. So these are the two lessons: end every chapter with a hook, and kill your children. stay on message.
Artists usually mirror some parts of themselves in their characters, and I assume you did the same thing. So how much of Pig's personality is really just your personality? How much of yourself can we find in Pig?
110%. Like him, well, I was born in LA, Los Angeles, but moved to Geneva when I was 1 year old. So I learned French first, even though my mother was an American. I was in Geneva speaking French. I didn't speak English until I learned it a little bit at school, and then moved to London for 1 year, and then came to America in '73. So my English, that's why you can hear my French accent is, and likewise, Pig has a little bit of an accent, and he counts like this, which is the dactylonomy that Lily remarks on, is a very French. You count like 1, 2, 3, 4. So there are certain mannerism that I could describe Pig having. The big difference between Pig and me is that he has 2 PhDs and I have none. So I describe the kind of life that I would have liked to have led, and so he became my hero by extension. One amusing small anecdote is that when I was in high school, one of my teachers, again in Switzerland, I was always interested in everything. I was reading and reading. Thank God back then we did not have social media. So I didn't have any distractions. So I read constantly, and I accumulated a lot of knowledge. And one of my teachers called me Pic de la Mirandole. And that's where the name came from. Pic de Lucrète Now, why the de Lucrète is because his last name Lucrète is very close to Lucretius, one of my heroes, uh, one of the Renaissance greats. So anyway, Pic de Lucrète is basically one of my avatars, and I only wish that I could have lived his life. Why do I have a mathematician as one of the other heroes in the story is because mathematics is one of my great interests besides physics, astronomy, and cosmology. Um, I find this the whole pursuit to be extraordinarily intellectually challenging and rewarding. So yes, I identify myself with a lot of the characters that I wrote. Not the bad guys, but the good guys.
Should we expect anything more from you? Do you plan to release any other thing?
Yes, I have the ambition to write another novel, or possibly several more.
Well,
Ideally, though, I would prefer to find a publisher because publishing it oneself takes a lot of time and effort, and I would prefer to focus on the writing and then some of the marketing. I'm happy to do, but the publishing itself is a royal pain in the nether region, as Van Eyck would say in the book. Um, so yes, I have been thinking about an idea, starting to jot down a storyline. Um, it also has to do with AI uh, and possibly I use extraterrestrial intelligence as one concept, but I don't want to say much more than that.
well, that's very exciting. I look forward to reading more from you.
One of the central things we haven't talked about is that I want to uh, make the very important point that international collaboration is absolutely essential in solving global problems. And that is also a theme that is across the entire novel of Awe. International collaboration, and unfortunately, we have some less than wise currents in the American government, which are preventing the free flow of information. I mean, we all understand that security is important, and we want to make sure that secrets don't come out. But at the same time, restricting the free flow of information between scientists is done at our peril.